This is 1059 The Region, where parents talk and explore practical, proactive, and evidence-based solutions. This is Where Parents Talk with Lianne Castelino.
Great to have you along for this edition of Where Parents Talk on 1059 The Region. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lianne Castelino. Every week, we talk to moms and dads on the show from all walks of life, discussing raising kids today with a particular focus on teens and young adults. Our first guest is a York Region resident. He's a father of three, a sports broadcaster, and author. A native of Ottawa, James Duthie is also an award-winning host of hockey, golf, and much more on TSN, the sports network. James Duthie, thank you so much for being here on Where Parents Talk.
Lianne, thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be occasionally on the other side of the interview situation.
Well, and I wonder, have you talked much about being a dad before in terms of being interviewed about it?
I don't know that I have at all, really. I wrote a lot about my kids when I was younger. I used to write columns for various papers and for TSN, and ended up writing a lot about my children because, you know, they take over your entire life, particularly in the early years. And so I wrote a lot about them, but I don't know that I've ever been interviewed about them before. So
it's carte blanche then. I'm going to.
You can go wherever you want.
Exactly.
Open book.
Let's talk about that. The fact that you wrote about your kids when they were younger. Why did you want to do that?
Well, I think I was just your typical sucky dad who loved them so much and thought they were the most wonderful things on the planet, and obviously better than everybody else's kids, right? So, I think when I wrote about sports, I wanted to do different columns than your typical sports writing columns, which is analyzing the Maple Leafs power play or whatever it may be. And so I would write a lot about my kids' sporting activities and, you know, being a sports dad for the first time. My son was a hockey player. My daughters played soccer and swam and such. So I guess, I felt that it was something other parents could relate to, right? Going through all this stuff for the first time, being a coach, coaching my kids and all those things. So I just got a kick out of it. And I write fairly light. And there was a lot of fodder for comedy in kids sports, particularly when they're really young.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you, have you always wanted to be a dad?
Yes. Always, I think. I was lucky enough to have two great parents and a really good childhood growing up in the suburbs of Ottawa. And so I don't think when you're 19 or 20 years old, you want to have kids. You're too busy out and living life. But as soon as I met the woman who would become my wife I think I was 25 when we met, I pretty much knew I wanted to have a big family with this woman if she'd put up with me and have as many kids, have a bunch of kids around.
Well, and you guys, kind of have an interesting story in the sense that your kids are all really close together. So we should say that you've got two girls and a boy, and they are 21, 20, and 18. So all I picture when you talk about the early days are just diapers flying everywhere. Thank God you're over that part, I guess.
It's as, any parent listening who has any of that situation, it's pure and utter mayhem. Those, the years from, I would say, when the third one was born until the third one became maybe 5 or 6. And that is a triumphant moment. One of the greatest moments of my life is when the third one got out of diapers. And that was the biggest celebration. It's just, that's such a massive deal for parents when you have multiple children, when you get that out of the way. But it was pure chaos. It's all a blur, but it's also probably the favorite years of my life in many ways. They're all the stages are great. The stage we're at right now, I love the fact that my kids are adults and, you can go out and have these normal conversations. I took my son on a golf trip this summer, which was really special. But I really loved those years when they were, sort of 2, 4, and 5, that kind of thing, when they still came running to the door every time dad came home from work, or, particularly I go on these little trips for work where I'd be off at the Super Bowl or something. And the way they come to run and greet you at the door will be thing. Now it's only my dogs that do that.
You're bringing back memories. Yes, the running up to the door is absolutely priceless.
Right.
Let's talk about that balance, though, right? Because you've got a very busy job. The media is not known generally to be a friendly environment for families. So how have you gone about sort of balancing that as a dad?
Well, I think it was a lot of sacrifice from my wife, first of all. I can tell you that when we had our first, Jared is my boy. My wife was working back then. We were living in off the Danforth in Toronto, and she went back to work, and we had him in a daycare facility. And I remember we went to pick him up one day. And by the way, there's a million fantastic daycares in Toronto, but he was staying at this lady's house, and we sort of came up to the door, and he was in one of those jumping things, you put your kid in that's supported from, and he just looked, I think he looked miserable, and she happened to not be around. It was just a bad experience, probably us being more protective than anything else. But I remember my wife thinking, I can't leave him anymore. And so she stopped working and never went back. And I think so. I owe her a ton for doing that and allowing me to have that job to be able to travel. I'm fortunate. I'm not like, the play-by-play guys, the guys who are out calling every single game. I think that's a really tough gig to be a parent, because they're on the road so much. For me, it's more, I'll do maybe a week every 2 months. The events that I do are kind of sporadic, where I'll be away for a week at the Super Bowl, or a week at the Masters, or the Grey Cup, or the World Juniors. But I'm home an awful lot the rest of the time. And so it worked out okay.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because not everybody, as you say, has that sort of luxury. You are listening to Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. I'm Lianne Castelino, in conversation with Aurora resident, father of 3, and TSN host James Duthie. So, James, when we talk about, balancing work and family, there's a guilt element that inevitably enters the equation, right? And I think oftentimes it's very different for dads, that guilt piece, than it is for moms. So when you are away and have been away from your kids, how do you manage the guilt? And then do you overcompensate when you come back in any way, or how do you go about that?
I certainly think when my kids were young, I probably did. My daughter, Darian, who is my oldest daughter, my middle child, her birthday is June the 1st. And that would always coincide with the Stanley Cup final. Every year I would leave on somewhere around May 27th, May 28th to go cover the Stanley Cup final and not be home until June 9th, 10th, whatever that may be. So I missed her birthday. Boy, a lot of years in there. And I felt a lot of guilt. And so probably showered her with more gifts than the other kids got when I came back, because I felt so bad. I mean, technology today, it's so much better than when we were young, Lianne, where you can at least FaceTime and, have a real conversation with your child while you're away, which I think makes it easier. But that was difficult. And the other part was Christmas, the World Junior Hockey Championship, which is a big part of what I do and what TSN always starts on the day after Christmas. And so I would leave. I would try to stay around until Christmas night, depending on where the tournament was, and then fly off somewhere. And that was always really difficult too. Christmas was always a really special time in our family. But as the kids got a little bit older, they started coming with me, and we'd have Christmas on the road. And they really love hockey and love the tournament. So that sort of became our own tradition. But in those early years, that was difficult. Those were the two hardest, is missing my daughter's birthday and running away at Christmas every single time. But do you overcompensate? Probably. I just think my kids sort of got used to it, right? That was what they grew up with, is that dad was going to take off on Christmas night and not be home till early January. And I don't think they feel they don't, I don't think they resent me. They're not going to be in therapy in a few years saying, why wasn't Dad home on Boxing Day?
Let's hope not. So let's talk about that piece in the sense of, raising kids, especially in today's day and age, the fact that your kids are, in their late teens, early 20s, against the backdrop of celebrity and fame. Now, it presents some unique challenges, I'm sure, for you and your family, or maybe not. I don't know. How would you describe that experience overall?
For me, it's been incredibly positive. And, part of that reason is because, let's face it, Canadian celebrity and Canadian fame is different. And I always put, a Canadian sportscaster, I don't know if the A-list celebrities or movie stars, I'm somewhere down around Q or W or Z. So I always find it's the perfect level of, I guess, notoriety or celebrity where, people do recognize you and such, but Canadians for the most part are so nice. So if I'm out in the grocery store or out at a restaurant with my family, people may come up and say hi, but no one ever hassles you. And so I think if you ask my children this question, they would say it's a benefit more than anything else, being able to come to some of the games that they've been able to come to with me or meet players here and there. I can't speak for them, but I think it's been more a real positive for them. We just filmed a commercial actually for, I don't know if I won't give the company a free plug on here for you, but through TSN. It was the first time my entire family had been in a commercial. So we just did that this week. And it was kind of cool having them all involved. And they got a kick out of it, getting makeup and doing the whole thing that is part of my career. So I don't think it's been a true challenge. I can remember when my son played hockey when he was younger, he would get, there'd be the odd kid who would give him a hard time, recognize his name on the back of the sweater and might chirp him a little bit. But for the most part, I think they would say that it's been mostly a positive.
Wonderful. Let me ask you, what do you find most challenging being a parent today?
Boy, I just, you feel like apologizing to your own parents for everything you put them through.
Yes.
Because I was a good kid, but I did go out late and do things. And I've told my mom this. My dad has passed away, but my mom is still alive. And I've told him, man, Mom, I'm so sorry for everything I did, because now you it's not till now that you understand. And the worry that, is sort of constantly there, every time they're, and especially now when they're, driving by themselves. I have two kids at Guelph and one at Queens, and away all the time and going away for weekends, and how much you worry about them. And the other thing, I remember Bob McKenzie, my TSN colleague and one of my best friends, who his kids were certainly older than mine. He's a little bit older than me. And when my kids were little and I would be worrying about something, his kids, he'd say, James, it's little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. And I think that's so true now when you see them trying to navigate their way towards adulthood and all the challenges that faces. And it's hard. It's hard being a 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, any age kid right now, particularly during COVID. But I think, growing into adulthood, I feel so bad for them missing out on a couple of, what are some of the best years in your life. Obviously small scale problems compared to what the rest of COVID has caused, but it's still real when you're a parent. So
more with James Duthie of TSN when we come back.
Want to learn more about the show? Email info@whereparentstalk.com. Stick around. Lianne Castelino and Where Parents Talk will be right back on 1059 The Region. Welcome back to Where Parents Talk. Listen live at 1059theregion.com. Here's Lianne Castelino.
Welcome back. We are speaking to father of three and TSN host James Duthie. Before the break, James, you were sharing your thoughts on some of the challenges of being the parent of a teen and young adult today.
It's hard. I remember all the stress of careers and getting through university and what am I going to be, and relationships and all those things. And I think your parents wear that stress much more than I knew at that age. Yeah. That, and I don't think kids necessarily understand how, when they're stressed about something, when they have an issue, how hard that is on a parent. And so, I think that's the greatest challenge right now, is that you just worry about every little thing in their lives, probably too much, I suppose. But hey, that's the life of being a dad.
Well, and then you throw in the internet and social media, and that just is, elevates all that worry and wonder to another degree. And certainly our parents never had to deal with that. You just take that off the table, and it's a completely different kettle of fish, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I've been fortunate with my kids. They have not had issues. They never had issues with bullying or anything like that growing up, and they keep their accounts pretty private. So that part of it's good. So, I get it from my standpoint, right? Just because of my job, I have a large social media presence, and you always get there. I'm not a huge fan of it, I'll be honest. I kind of wish sometimes, I think that we had it much easier in the days when it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. There are certainly benefits to social media, but I personally think that there are more negatives, and I would prefer, it's going to sound like the old guy screaming on his lawn, but I would prefer my kids had gotten to grow up in an age without all those issues of social media, and whether your Instagram post is getting liked or not, and all those things. But hey, we can't control that. And like I said, there haven't been many negative experiences so far from my kids all there. So knock on wood, I've been lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I are of the same sort of vintage. And I absolutely concur that life was far more simple when social media didn't exist in many ways. James, how would you describe your parenting style?
Probably too loose. My father was an RCMP officer and a wonderful man. I loved him dearly. He was much stricter on me. And I felt I had to, I don't want to say I lived a double life. That's a bit of a stretch, but the stuff that I had to get away with in high school, I just didn't feel, I had to get away with stuff. I had to go behind their backs to do things because my dad was so strict, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. Mm-hmm. And so I made a determination early that I was going to be, the opposite, that, if my kid was in high school and there was going to a party, I wasn't going to say, don't touch alcohol. I would say, just be responsible. And if you need me to come pick you up, I'll come pick you up. And I think it worked out really well. I'm not saying my kids have never done anything that I don't know about. I'm sure they all have, but I just felt, keeping the relationship more open and honest and being letting them make their own mistakes, I think a little bit more, perhaps. As I have 3 kids who are becoming adults who are good kids, they're good people, they're kind people. And, I think that's all you can really strive for as a parent, right? I think if you try to make them this, that, and the other thing, that's a lot of work. And for the most part, I just say to them, be good human beings. And that's all I want from you. I don't expect anything else. I'm not going to crack down on you if your grades aren't super high, or I don't care what your job is, or all those things. Just be good people, and the rest will follow. And that's worked out pretty well so far.
Well, and it's easy to get caught up in the opposite, right? Because obviously we live in a very competitive world, and then you throw social media in there, and everybody's looking at what everyone else is doing. So, how did you go about basically doing the opposite of that?
Well, like I say, this is certainly not a plan that I would give parents that parental advice on. The Duthie plan is not something I would do. I sort of let them. I did not do a lot of the things that parents do in that, checking what they were doing on their phone or taking their phones away and checking once a week, even when they were 12, 13, 14 years old. My philosophy was, you have freedom until you screw up. And then that's when, we'll have to have a talk. And fortunately they didn't really screw up. Like I said, I don't know. I wanted them to have their privacy and have their own lives that way, and let them sort of forge their own way and make their own mistakes. So I was probably, if I had to do it all again, maybe I'd be a little stricter, but like I said, it worked out okay for me. I got lucky and never had any issues with them. But that was sort of the way we parented, both my wife and I in general, was, we're going to give you a very long leash here, but if you abuse it in any way, then it will change. And my kids were pretty good with that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And in fact, if you talk to any experts who, psychologists or those types of people, therapists who talk about raising kids today, and that's one of the things that they'll tell you is, helicopter parenting is not the answer, and letting them grow into independence on their own certainly has a lot of merit. James, are there any budding sports broadcasters or athletes among your three?
No. And it's funny. My middle daughter pondered taking journalism at Carleton, where I took journalism, and she ended up following her brother into business at Guelph. And I think sometimes she says to me, I wish I had taken journalism, but I certainly didn't push them that way. And they're not like me. I don't think, and I like that. I think in some ways they're more like their mother. They don't have to be the center of attention, which people in television often have to be. So they were good athletes. I never really pushed them hard in sports. That was another one of my goals and I think that's a place where I do have some expertise, where I see parents make mistakes, is the real, pushing hard to, I think sometimes we want to live vicariously through our children, as if we were a failed athlete. Maybe this is the opportunity to make up for it. And, particularly in rep hockey with my son, I saw so many parents who push their kids so hard. You got to go to power skating 3 times a week, you're at this and that and the other thing. And I really believe that, there's nothing wrong with pushing your kid a little bit, but you have to let them lead the way. You have to watch your child and say, okay, does he like this? Is he interested in this? And maybe because of my job, I had that perspective. And so I sort of let our kids, decide what they wanted to do and decide. I think you have to give them a little push here and there for sure, but I was not going to, try and create an athlete out of my child, which I think some parents fall into that trap sometimes. I've seen far too many miserable kids at rinks who I can tell don't want to be there, but they're being pushed there by parents who have these dreams of them making it somewhere. And I think that if they want to be that, they will figure it out for themselves, basically. So that's one thing I would say, certainly, is you have to let your kids, push them into a bunch of different things. Like maybe they don't want to play hockey, but push them into hockey to try it, or swimming, or whether it's not sports, something else, dance, theater, anything like that. And but don't push them too hard. If they don't like it, let them find something else that they like. And that worked really well with my kids.
So on that note, with respect to the thousands of people, I'm sure at this point that you've interviewed, anybody in there that comes to mind when it comes to maybe a fellow parent that you met and you discussed raising kids with that person that really inspired you, or, that you drew, inspiration from in some way on your journey as a dad?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that there's an athlete in particular. Athletes are unbelievable at what they do, but I think that's another flaw we make with all celebrities, is we try to make them role models and everything. And just because someone is fantastic at basketball or something, or is a great TV actor, that doesn't mean they should be doling out parental advice. I think it's more from the people around me that I work with. I mentioned Bob McKenzie, who used to bring his 2 boys to the set, and I would watch how they interacted and maybe learn a little bit from him, some of the other people that I worked with more than anything else. But, usually in my job, when you're interviewing people, they're on their own anyway. And maybe you chat a little bit about your kids, but I'm not sure that I was inspired by any of them. We sort of found our own way. I think I was probably inspired more by my own parents than anything else, despite what I said about, my dad being tough on me when he was young. My parents were also just unbelievable at letting all three of us, I have two sisters, find our own way and be completely and utterly supportive of whatever we wanted to do. I don't remember my parents ever trying to push me in any direction at all. Instead, once I decided, on journalism and broadcasting, they were just, so supportive of every single move I made. And so I think that would be my inspiration, and is learning from them to just whatever your kids want to be, just to, even if you don't necessarily think that would be your thing, to throw yourselves 100% behind them. So you're like, life is tough enough, right? Without having, someone very close to you, questioning what you're doing. So, that's the one thing we've tried to push on our kids is, do whatever moves you, as long as it's a positive thing, obviously, and we'll be there supportive of whatever you do.
That's wonderful advice, right? And it's always one of those things that's easier said than done in many ways. But let me ask you to finish off our conversation here. You and your wife are in the infancy of being empty nesters. So I wonder, how's that going?
There's a definite asterisk on the empty nest with us because we have 3 dogs who are all extremely high maintenance. And so when people say, is it quiet around the house? It's definitely not quiet with the 3 dogs. And we were looking forward to it. As much as I've been praising my kids in this interview, they are slobs who do not clean up after themselves. And we were very much looking forward to having at least a clean house for a while. That is the one flaw I did in parenting is I thought that one of my 3 children would get the clean gene, and absolutely none of them got it. So, great kids who leave laundry everywhere, like all kids, and don't do their dishes very well. But I'm a failed father that way. But beyond that, really good kids. So we're enjoying so far having a little bit of peace and quiet for a while. I'm sure that we'll start missing them in a few weeks. But right now it's okay. My early reviews on Empty Nest is pretty good 2 days in.
That's awesome. James Duthie, TSN hockey host, father of 3, and author. Certainly one of the busiest times of the year sports-wise. We thank you so much for taking time out to join us today.
Lianne, it was a true pleasure. Thank you.
That's our show. See you next time.
Sign up for Lianne's parenting newsletter and so much more at whereparentstalk.com. This is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region.